Hello, and welcome to my talk on stress, a better understanding. I'm Dr. Abrahamson. Dr. Chip Abrahamson is my YouTube moniker. And today we're going to get a better understanding of what stress really is. This is a repeat of a talk I gave July 28th at Bay Pines, VA. It's a long version and more detailed than another one I'll put up later, which will be more simple for those who want a quicker version. Okay, let's get started. I am not a psychiatrist. These are my disclosures. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a chaplain, but I am a physician with 35 years experience practicing medicine. 8 years of that experience with veterans, many of whom have had PTSD. And I have my own personal experience overcoming stress. I've had personal contact and sifted through many books, doctors, therapists, counselors, ministers, all of whom have had firsthand experience treating patients with stress-related disorders. And I have a better understanding of stress to share with you today. Our walkaway goals: understand what stress really is, learn the 3 cascading responses to a threat, what parts of the brain function under each response, including the body's physiologic response to each. Learn how the vagus nerve transmits stress to the body's organs, leading to a multitude of diseases, including heart disease and cancer, not just ulcers and migraine headaches. And recently, a lot of evidence points to autoimmune diseases being stress-related, if not stress-caused. Learn how drugs, including sugar and caffeine, are the way to manage stress for the addict, not the cause of addiction. And compare the physical, mental, and spiritual approaches to understanding and managing or overcoming stress. Many people may not be aware, but PTSD Awareness Month is honored in June every year, and PTSD Awareness Day on June 27th. Stress and post-traumatic stress disorder is a big issue in the military. And as we'll see, it's a big issue in the world. Stress has become a crisis in our country and in the world. Every day, 22 veterans commit suicide. Suicide rates among teenagers have dramatically increased in the past 10 years. Cancer incidence has gone from 1 in 30 to 1 in 2 men and 1 in 2.7 women diagnosed with cancer before they die since the Cancer Act signed by President Nixon in 1971. The war on cancer for 40 years has not made a difference. We do not have an opiate crisis. The war on drugs is not the answer. It is a stress crisis. In the military, they now have full-time soldiers whose sole job is to go into combat and handle the stress amongst the soldiers who are in battle. This is a t-shirt from a patient that I saw and I took a picture of front and back. The 113th Medical Detachment from Palo Alto, California. Combat stress control. The commander of the 113th Medical Detachment on the website, the VA there in Palo Alto, wrote a poem, and I copied it to point out just a couple words that will introduce us to what stress is. In the second sentence, scared by evil, in spirit. The third line, off-centered and confused in the direction I should take. And then the fourth sentence, hurt and anger. So this gives us an idea of what we're getting into here. Scared by evil, spiritual, off-centered, confused, lacking direction, hurt and anger. These are qualities of someone who's stressed. The primary mission of these combat stress control units is to treat the soldiers with operational combat stress, grief and loss, and battle fatigue. The VA has a whole health initiative. In 2016, Congress passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act to address the national opioid epidemic. They wanted to do research on complementary and integrative health, other approaches to overcoming stress and opioid addiction. And now we have at the VA the whole health system of care, incorporating patient-centered care and this complementary and integrative health. We now have integrative health doctors certified at the VA, primary care doctors. And then 4 years later, a study showed that this whole health approach was successful at the VA in helping veterans with chronic pain who use the VA whole health services. So let's use the whole health approach, and it's modern and makes sense. We'll start with physical, which is the body, and understanding how stress affects our body and where it affects the body. We'll then go to the psychological or mental or mind approach, and finish with the spiritual approach. At the Bay Pines VA, we have a mental health service with psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists, and others. And we also have a chaplain service to help the veterans deal with stress, either manage it or overcome. So let's start with the physical approach to stress. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk, MD, a practicing psychiatrist, 30 years of PTSD research, not only an author, but researcher, professor of psychiatry at Boston University, School of Medicine, well-written, many articles, and finally his Body Keeps the Score, which is a summary of 30 years of PTSD research, not on his own, but also from other psychiatrists and other institutions. Chapter 1 of this book, Lessons from Vietnam Veterans. He opens the book with a paragraph: one does not have to be a combat soldier or visit a refugee camp in Syria or the Congo to encounter trauma. And what he's trying to say in the introduction of the book is that PTSD is not just for veterans. He finishes the paragraph with: trauma happens to us, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Psychological trauma, spiritual trauma, happens to many people. Research by the CDC shows that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child, 1 in 4 beaten by a parent. People grow up with alcoholic relatives. Stress follows trauma. So PTSD is not just a soldier problem or shell shock. It happens to a lot of people, and most people have experienced stress, not just military veterans. So using Bessel van der Kolk's information from the research he has in his book, let's try and gain a better understanding of the physical nature of stress. Okay, so the physical approach is to look into the body and see what's going on when someone is stressed. And there are 3 things we're going to look at. Research on monkeys, functional MRI and brain anatomy, what part of the brain is working under stress or when someone's not under stress, and also the vagus nerve, how these impulses from the brain are transmitted to the body, causing symptoms and disease. First, the monkey research. The big question is, what do primates do? What do monkeys do when they're threatened? And across the board, no one gets this right when I ask, when I give this talk. Everybody thinks fight and flight. The fight or flight reaction is well known to everybody. But what most people don't realize is that the first thing that monkeys do when they're threatened, if there's a big gorilla doll with a noise put in the room with them, the first thing they do is look around for social support. They want to see if there are other monkeys there to help. And this is a picture on the left, the social engagement system This monkey is in his vagal ventral complex. He's calm, and later on I'll show you where that is in the brain. But he's calm and he's just looking around for help. And if there's no one around to help, or the support is inadequate, second, then they will react emotionally. And this is what the monkey looks like in the middle when he reacts emotionally. And if you look at number 2 at the bottom, fight or flight, teeth bared, the face of rage and terror, sympathetic nervous system. And what I'd like you to remember is rage and terror. We're starting to get an idea that the physical response to stress is sympathetic nervous system, and it is anger and fear, rage and terror. What do primates do when they're threatened? If there's no social support, and if there's no way out, they have a fight or flight reaction, adrenaline, and the threat is too big to fight. And so they look for a way out. And if there's no way out, then their third response is collapse. That's the monkey on the far right. The body signals defeat and withdraws in the dorsal vagal complex. And this monkey is just going to let the threat take his life. But since he is collapsed and in his dorsal vagal complex, he will feel no pain. This is where veterans and a lot of people spend their life under chronic stress in the DVC, but at least they don't feel the pain. It's self-protective. So we're starting to come up with a definition of stress. Stress is not the threat. Stress is not your job. It's not your spouse. It's not your family. Stress is your emotional response to the threat. Stress is anger and fear. Stress is not the threat. Stress is your emotional reaction to what you believe is a threat. Stress is the middle response of the monkeys. I have one slide just to clarify, because I always get questions about stress being good for you, acute stress, or stress with athletes. And so I'll clarify it here. Physical stress or hormetic stress, improving physical performance with things like CO2 breathing, holding your breath, exposure to cold, hyperventilation. That's not the topic of today's presentation. Those are all physical stresses that can improve performance, but not the topic of today's discussion. This presentation is on emotional stress. If you do want to read more about hormetic stress, I strongly recommend you read this 2020 book by author James Nestor from San Francisco. It has an excellent summary of all the history and a lot of the techniques of hormetic or physical stress. Okay, so let's move on. The physiology of stress, the vagus nerve, the pituitary gland, and the prefrontal cortex. Here's a picture from Bessel van der Kolk's book of a man who's stressed out. His facial expression is uncontrolled. If you are stressed, you can fake a smile, but people can tell that you're faking. Your facial muscles are controlled by the autonomic or automatic nervous system. So are multiple other areas of the body, your organs. You can see all the arrows pointing from the vagus nerve, which has the double arrow toward the bottom of the brain, and it goes to the gut, the heart, lungs, and speeds up heart rate. If it's not functioning properly with parasympathetic impulse, and on and on. Breathe faster. From 30 years of PTSD research headed by Stephen Porges, MD, psychiatrist at the University of North Carolina, the polyvagal theory was developed. The vagus nerve is essential to understanding how people with trauma That's a quote from Bessel van der Kolk's book. When the ventral vagal complex runs the show, we smile when others smile at us, nod our heads when we agree, and frown when others tell us of their misfortunes. The VVC via the vagus nerve sends signals to slow the heart and breathing, making us feel at peace. The vagus nerve is primarily parasympathetic and peaceful. When something distressing happens, we signal our upset in facial expressions and tone of voice, and if no one responds to our call, then the limbic brain, the limbic system, LS, jumps in. The sympathetic nervous system takes over, mobilizing muscles, heart, and lungs for fight or flight. Finally, if there's no way out and there's nothing we can do to stave off the inevitable, we will activate the ultimate emergency system, the dorsal vagal complex. This system reaches down below the diaphragm to the stomach, kidneys, intestines, and drastically reduces metabolism throughout the body, again through the vagus nerve. Our heart rate plunges, we can't breathe, our gut stops working or empties, literally scaring the shit out of us. This is the point at which we disengage, collapse, and freeze. Here's a picture of the brain to help you understand. The cerebral cortex at the top, the prefrontal cortex is interacting with other people, social response. The limbic brain in the middle part of the brain, which is next, is where the emotions are, fight or flight, fear, terror, or anger. And then the bottom, the brainstem, or reptilian brain, and that's where the vagus nerve complex is that we looked at a previous slide. So the vagus nerve arises from that lower brain, the reptilian brain or the brainstem, and goes to multiple organs. And when in the VVC, the ventral vagal complex and the brainstem, if that's what's functioning in our brain, the vagus nerve transmits parasympathetic impulses, telling our body all is well, and digestion, sleep, and mating activities are parasympathetic driven. If there's a threat, other parts of the brain light up on fMRI. Initially, the prefrontal cortex is seeking social support, but if there's no social support, the limbic system lights up, and we feel the stress. We feel our heart rate go up. We also are tense. We feel fear. And a lot of people feel anger. The limbic system interrupts the peaceful life due to a perceived threat. We end up with problems if we have chronic stress, such as sleepless nights, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcers, migraine, headaches, TMJ, erectile dysfunction, altered gut biome. Natasha Campbell McBride came out with her recent book showing that the gut bacteria recede under stress, the healthy ones. Her book is Gut and Physiology Syndrome. Heart palpitations, chest pain. And so this is stress. And then we start, it's just human nature to self-manage the stress. We will start to exhibit self-protective behaviors, fight or flight, control, and avoidance. Control behavior, we now know with fMRI or functional MRI that the default mode network lights up in the middle of the brain from front to back. This will calm down the limbic system. Or the other way to get out of the stressful response, the fear and anger, is to go into the dorsal vagal complex, which is avoidance behavior or escape. Also a self-protective way of living. So we either fight or flight, we either control or avoid. Control being trying to make the world the way we want it to be so we don't feel stressed, or we avoid by not dealing with life. There are languages that can help understand when people are looking for social support or trying to control or trying to avoid. Social support, we can do this together. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Control people say things like, we must fight cancer, join the fight for whatever your cause is. And avoidance people say things like, it's not worth fighting, and thank God it's Friday. And here is 3 pictures of different parts of the brain when someone is stressed out. The picture on the left, the limbic system lights up under stress. That's where the emotions come out. The visual cortex lights up more. And people constantly look around. Hypervigilance is a word used for that. And then the third one on the right, Broca's speech area is markedly depressed when someone is stressed. They have trouble communicating. There's a good book I'm going to show you on Broca's speech area, because when it's really, really depressed, that really is, we now know, the cause of autism. And here's the book by John Elder Robison, who had that part of his brain stimulated and was able to overcome his autism completely for about 6 weeks until the stimulation wore off. So fMRI explains how a person who is stressed is emotional, their limbic system is lighting up, is hypervigilant, their visual cortex is extra active, and they have difficulty communicating. Their speech center is deactivated. And in the cerebral cortex, the top of the brain doesn't work at all when someone is in collapse or in their dorsal vagal complex. This is classic PTSD. A lot of these veterans need caretakers. They can't do simple things, even make their appointments and show up on time. They have this as a self-protective automatic mechanism. And when you're in the DVC, you don't feel the pain of the stress. Okay, so that sums up Dr. Van der Kolk's book. We owe a lot to him with functional MRI and the monkey studies and the vagus nerve research. We know a lot more now about what's going on inside our body under stress. How can we recognize stress? Someone who's in a life of stress is in a life of chaos and crisis. They're bouncing from one emotional reaction to the next, blaming, complaining. They're unable to make good decisions logically. They have panic attacks, outbursts of anger. They're constantly putting out fires. More subtle signs of stress, self-protective behaviors, some, and others just unrecognized physical problems, workaholism, overeating, anorexia, substance abuse, exercise fanatics, people pleasers, people with high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, stomach cramps, headaches, and asthma. Primary care providers, when asked, have said that 90% of visits to a family doctor are stress-related. Even more subtle signs of stress. What if you don't think you're stressed out, but you want to know for sure? Patrick McCallan, president of the Buteco Clinic and author of The Breathing Cure, has an international business with 125 employees. And all he does is go around to big companies who notice that their employees have trouble concentrating, and he teaches them how to breathe. 6 seconds in, 6 seconds exhale. And all of a sudden they concentrate well. Plus he gives talks on the science to explain how stress interferes with concentration. The breathing rate, if you're at rest, you should be breathing no more than 6 breaths a minute. 5, 6 seconds in, 5, 6 seconds out. And if you notice that you're breathing faster than that at rest, you probably have chronic stress. Heart rate variability. When you breathe in, your heart rate should increase 5 to 10 beats a minute. And when you breathe out, when you exhale, it should slow down 5 to 10 beats a minute. And then lastly, the control pause. If you're stressed out and you're not sure when you're at rest, when you wake up is a good time, then close your mouth and pinch your nose after you exhale and see how long you can hold it before you're forced to take a breath. And if it's less than 20 seconds, you're probably really stressed out and have some kind of disease like asthma. And if it's between 20 and 40 seconds, you may have some chronic disease, hypertension, whatever, or under triggers, you might have symptoms, maybe a panic attack, something like that. And if you're over 40 seconds, you're probably exercising and probably doing very well, very little stress. So let's go through the history of the mind-body approach. Joan Borysenko was one of the first. It started in the 80s, the mind-body approach in the United States, and she was one of the first to show that diseases were stress-related, most, if not all. One of the greatest risk factors for heart disease is frequent outbursts of anger. That was first shown by Dean Ornish, MD, with his program for reversing heart disease, in which he had a case study of a 38-year-old, apparently healthy male who died of a heart attack. And his only risk factor was he lost his temper 30 times a day. One of the greatest risk factors for cancer is living in fear, inability to speak up. People who don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings, afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, afraid of a reaction of another person, so they don't speak their mind or speak up about what they see. These people get cancer. Nice people get cancer. Everybody knows that. Stress, which is anger and fear, causes physical disease and death. Anger and heart disease. Here's a book by Dr. Robert Elliott, introduction by Michael DeBakey, famous heart surgeon. Is it worth dying for you? From the back of the book, apparently healthy people who overreact to such common occurrences as losing a tennis game or missing a train. If you're a hot reactor, you may be responding to stress with an all-out physical effort that is taking a heavy toll on your health, giving you heart disease and early death. Cancer. Gabor Mate, MD, my favorite author, wrote that when the body says no, those people that are unable to speak up, unable to say no, have a much higher risk of getting cancer. And remember, 1 in 2 men in the United States are diagnosed with cancer now before they die, and 1 in 2.7 women. People-pleasing nice people are often stressed. They have trouble saying no. They are at high risk for cancer. So let's move on to physical approaches to managing stress. The goal is to live in the VVC, to stay calm all day, all night, not react to threats. But stress must be overcome to really be healthy. Gene research is not going to solve the problem, but we do have some physical approaches to managing stress. Bernie Siegel in 1986 wrote a book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. He was a cancer surgeon. He was doing something called the Whipple procedure, taking out people's pancreas, parts of the stomach, liver, on and on, in hope to extend someone's life when they had pancreatic cancer. And the people that decided not to have surgery were given a few months to live. And 99% of them did die within a few months if they didn't have the surgery. But then Bernie met one of his patients at the grocery store and said, "Aren't you the guy that had pancreatic cancer?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And Bernie said, "I thought you decided not to have the surgery." And the patient said, "Yeah, Dr. Siegel, I didn't have the surgery and I'm fine." And Bernie couldn't believe it. He thought maybe he went to Mexico and got Laetrile. And the guy said, "No, I didn't do any of that stuff, but I'm fine now." And so Bernie said, "Well, would you come to my office?" And he brought him in the office, and they went over his slides, did CAT scans, and looked at him. And they realized that this guy was cancer-free. And his story was that he started to speak up because he knew he only had a few months to live. So he quit his job, told his boss what a jerk he thought he was. And then he spoke up to his wife and said to his wife, "You've been treating me like a piece of furniture all these years, and that I'm not going to live like that anymore." And he said that he felt the cancer start to go away once he started speaking up for himself. So Bernie quit his job because of this patient. After his staff found out that there were a lot of people like this guy who refused surgery but got better. About 1% of the patients who refused surgery got better by doing this. And Bernie quit his job and started a social support group and wrote a book. So stress can cause cancer, and cancer sometimes can be overcome by overcoming stress. So the support groups do help. Recall that a monkey's first response to a threat is to look for social support. When adequate social support is there, the monkey is unlikely to react with fear or anger. But social support doesn't work for everybody. And so if you do have a support group, but it's not there all the time, or your sponsor's not available all the time, or maybe you have no social support, or you've tried it and it doesn't work. 12-step programs fail people as often as 82% of the time. Then what do you do? Fight or flight. Remember that the human nature natural approach to dealing with stress is either control or withdrawal. Fight or flight, just like the monkeys. Let's look at people, if they don't overcome stress, what can they do to try and avoid the stress? Michael Pollan wrote a great book called How to Change Your Mind. The default mode network lights up on functional MRI when someone is in a control mode. They're making their life and the life of others by controlling, usually through anger and imposing fear on people. They make the world the way they want it to be. The default mode network, fMRI images are up in the cerebral cortex, front to the back of the brain. And now we have phase 2 studies at Johns Hopkins and Berkeley. Guided psilocybin, that's a hallucinogen from mushrooms, guided psilocybin trips to treat depression and fear of death in terminal cancer patients. And so far it seems to be working. But interestingly, guess what they found on the functional MRI in the brains of patients on this powerful hallucinogen? Most people think, as I did before I read the book, that a hallucinogen would make your brain go haywire, that the functional MRI would light up all over the place. But that's actually not what happened. What happened was the default mode network was shut down. So people couldn't control their life or control their people anymore when they were on psilocybin. And so the hallucinations were more than likely reality, and their life under control, controlling themselves and others, probably the illusion. What about people who withdraw to try and self-protect and manage their stress? Avoidance, distractions, laziness, underachievement, video games, drugs and alcohol, carbs, sugar, smartphones this day and age, and young people, they get addicted very easily because it helps them avoid stress. These things temporarily make people feel better, but in the long term, just like control, they fail to overcome the stress. An aside about addiction is not the cause of stress. The drugs are not the cause of addiction. Addiction is just a way to manage the stress. It's a form of avoidance behavior. It's not the cause. As Russell Brand said in a podcast, drugs and alcohol are not my problem. Reality is my problem. And people think, that addicts, are on heroin, street drugs, pot, on and on. But caffeine hits the same receptors as cocaine. And here's the Starbucks mug that makes fun of something which is really an addiction problem. I must have coffee. And there's a stressed out person on the coffee cup who can calm down if they get their caffeine. The physical approach to managing stress is bottom up. Do something to relax, and then the limbic system will calm down. The psychological approach is more top down. We'll get to that later. The bottom up, this is just a picture of it. The bottom longer arrow going to a right angle, and the amygdala where the fear is. Herbert Benson, MD, 1975, did research after that with Buddhist monks, and wrote about the relaxation response, how breathing could calm down the limbic system and manage stress. And what he proved was you can control high blood pressure, which was thought to be essential, or idiopathic is another word for it, or nobody knows the cause is another way to define it. That's what we were taught in medical school, but the truth is it's stress, and it causes great problems, and high blood pressure can be managed with breathing techniques, and it can be overcome, as we'll see later. Here's a case report from my friend Art Brownstein, treatment of essential hypertension with yoga relaxation therapy. He had a pilot, and the pilot wasn't allowed to fly. He came into Art's office, and Art could tell he was depressed, and he said to him, "How would you like to fly again?" The guy lit up, made eye contact, and Art said to him, "Okay, I'm going to teach you yoga." And just a couple months later, the guy was back flying with normal high blood pressure, off his medication. What about meditation? Prayer is talking to God. Meditation is listening to God. That's from my friend Art Brownstein. And we'll get into it maybe more in the spiritual part, but for sure, if prayer life is all talking and no quiet, then stress likely is to remain. For many people, meditation is definitely a taste of the stress-free life. It gets us in the VVC. Breathing to relax is an outside-in approach, changing our physical state in order to influence the spiritual state. Breathing is the only bodily function that is both controllable and automatic. The impetus to breathe can be either sympathetic nervous system when stressing, or CO2 if we're not stressed, when we're relaxed. And when we're awake, we can stop breathing or breathe faster on our own. So breathing is really the only thing we can do to influence our autonomic nervous system. Okay, so the summary. That was long, but the physical or psychiatric approach is coming to an end here. And if you remember nothing, just remember this, that there is a stress cascade. There is a threat. And then when we are threatened, we will initially seek social support. We'll seek the support of others. I see people come to work stressed all the time because the first thing they do is not get to work. They want to catch up on the weekend with other people and make sure that the social support is there before they start working. If social support is inadequate, then stress occurs, anger or fear. And if people are living in anger or fear, then their behavior to self-protect, to avoid the stress feeling, is fight or flight behavior, control and avoidance behavior. And for some people, they go to the extreme, which is collapse, to avoid feeling the pain, and that is classic PTSD. There's a threat, there is seeking social support, followed by anger or fear, followed by fight or flight behavior, and ultimately collapse. This is the cascade of stress. To summarize the physical approach, remember that most, if not all, diseases are stress related. through the vagus nerve. Managing stress includes visiting the trauma to get out of the DVC into the limbic system, or relaxation techniques, bottom-up approach, or tranquilizers and beta blockers to calm down the limbic system, or antidepressants. So let's leave the body and go to the mind on our whole health approach. The mind is more a psychological viewpoint. The psychological viewpoint is that childhood trauma is the source of stress. I think Bessel van der Kolk would agree with that after reading his book. The psychological approach says that it is normal to have feelings of anger and fear. It's normal to get those feelings and to be stressed. And that the dysfunctional behavior comes from repressed feelings of anger or fear, trying to control or avoid and repress those feelings, or even be in the dorsal vagal complex, PTSD. And that's what leads to the dysfunctional behavior, according to the psychological approach. Self-protective ways of living, controlling and avoiding, keeping a lid on the insecurity, fear and doubt, anxiety and worry, or the controllers bullying and rescuing, punishing or fixing, the bullies, the angry people, the rescuers, the fearful people, or the codependents. These are the overachieving, criticizing, caffeine drinkers. They also love carbohydrates. The avoiders are the victims and escape artists. They complain, they feel stuck, they always have an excuse. They go into depression, they have substance use, they're the underachieving, easygoing beer drinkers. Like the psychiatric approach, the psychological approach believes in revisiting the trauma by unearthing repressed memories in order to uncover the repressed feelings, such as inner child work. And that can be very effective in uncovering repressed feelings. One goal is understanding where stress came from, and then open, honest communication, and then learn to manage the stress. The psychological approach is top down, this prefrontal cortex. Start thinking differently, and then the thoughts won't give you stress because they'll all be good thoughts, such as cognitive behavioral therapy. Byron Katie made this famous. She was just laying on her floor. That's where she would sleep at night because she was so depressed. She couldn't even get into bed. A cockroach was crawling on her, and she looked up at the window in the morning and had a thought that maybe she didn't have to live like that. And she changed the way she thought, and that changed her behavior, and she was no longer depressed. She described her epiphany in 1986. That she discovered that when she believed her thoughts, she suffered. But then when she didn't believe them, she didn't suffer. And that this is true for every human being. This is, for your understanding of stress, a very important statement. Believing thoughts suffer. Don't believe thoughts, don't suffer. But I want you to notice that in the psychological approach, that she says, I believed my thoughts. And when we get to the spiritual approach, you'll see that the spiritual approach is different. The psychological approach does say that these are your thoughts and that you can control your thoughts. Once you identify the thoughts, you can say, wow, is that thought really true? And can you turn it around? And she called that the work. So the psychological approach says it's not necessarily a physical threat that causes stress. It is a thought about threat. Even if there is a bear charging you, it's still the thought that causes you to be stressed. The mind approach starts with the premise that the thoughts are yours and you can change your thoughts. Advertising and stress. Advertising works by getting you to feel the way they want you to feel, usually less stressed. They put a thought in your head. Then they put a product in front of you that promises to make you feel that way all the time. And you buy it only to find out that it doesn't deliver. I couldn't find it after searching, but I did watch an ex-Google employee do a TED Talk a few years ago. And he said that Google wasn't after our personal information, that they just wanted to know what makes us stressed. And then they keep putting things like that in front of us to keep us emotional so that we will buy whatever promises to calm us down. Here's an ad that I got in the mailbox when I was putting this talk together. And it's from Volkswagen, and it's time to shine, and the family's happy, and the car is clean, and the sunshine out, and boy, we feel great. So how do we feel like that all the time? Well, just look at the little yellow print. You have to take advantage of their offer and go get service for your car, and then everything will be fine. This is how advertising works. For most people with stress, the psychological approach, like the psychiatric approach, is about managing, not overcoming stress. In fact, according to Rob McLaren, retired chief of the chaplain service, 88% of the veterans at Bay Pines fail to overcome stress after trying the psychiatric and psychological approaches. Breathing techniques just don't work for most people. Neither do trying to change their thoughts. Those that want to go further at the VA are referred to the chaplain service. And that's why now we move on to spirit. So we're body, mind, and spirit, whole health approach. And let's go on to the spiritual approach. From Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda's talking to Luke. Anger and fear, aggression, the dark side of the Force are they? And Luke says, is the dark side stronger? And Yoda says, no, but it is more seductive. And Luke says, how will I know the good side from the bad? And Yoda says, you will know when you are calm, at peace, passive. So fear, anger, and aggression are the dark side. That's evil. But it's not as strong as good. And when we are calm, at peace, and passive, then we are spiritually at peace. So let's find out more about the truth of this good and evil battle. The spiritual approach says that stress is a spirit of anger and fear. It's not an emotion. Primarily, we feel emotions, but it is because a spirit is influencing or controlling. Stress is post-traumatic according to the spiritual approach, just like psychological. Stress is a spiritual change from childhood trauma. The spiritual approach says that a child has no anger and no fear until they are traumatized. Adult stress is a carryover of childhood anger and fear. Adult stress is not due to the events or pressures of adult life. Stress is not your workplace. Stress is not from whom you live with. Stress is not from world events. Stress is a sign of the spiritual battle inside. This is a t-shirt to bring attention to the crisis of suicide amongst veterans. 22 veterans committing suicide every day. Don't give in to the war within. There is a battle inside people who are stressed. And now there's even an ad campaign for the Marines from the Department of Defense saying battles are won within. And this is where the spiritual battle is. The spiritual battle is inside out, not outside in, like the physiologic or physical approach. We must go within to understand that battle. The spiritual approach is different. The body and mind approaches are represented in the mental health service at the VA. The spirit approach is represented in the chaplain service. And there is a difference between managing stress, mental health, and overcoming stress, spiritual change. The premise of the Bible is that there's a difference between a morally restrained heart and a supernaturally changed heart. Timothy Keller, a preacher at a Presbyterian church in New York City. There's a difference between managing stress and overcoming stress by having a changed heart. This is a spiritual principle. Paul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the church at Ephesus said, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." And Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is within." These are spiritual approach principles. The spiritual approach is inside out. The spiritual approach is to seek spiritual change inside, and then the outside, the physical, will change. The limbic system won't be activated. The VVC will be where we live. We will live from inside once we have a spiritual change. The mind will then be renewed. There won't be any emotional reaction with anger or fear to situations or to thoughts. When there's a spiritual change, which we'll be able to see clearly. When you have overcome stress, you will have an inner guide, a different spirit guiding you, life within, and the VVC, parasympathetic nervous system activated. Breathing and heart rate will naturally slow down. No activation of the limbic system, no control or avoidance behavior from anger and fear, even when there's nobody around for social support. Also, a life without disease. Recall that emotional stress, that is anger and fear in response to a threat, is either responsible for or contributes to most, if not all, disease. A spiritual change breaks the cascade. The thoughts still occur. The situations still occur, but they are no longer threatening. So there is no emotional response, no stress. The spiritual approach, unlike the psychological approach, says the thoughts are not your thoughts. The psychological approach says they're your thoughts and you can just turn them around. But for 88% of the veterans, that doesn't work. So the spiritual approach is from Isaiah 55, God saying, "My thoughts are not your thoughts." Our thoughts are all lies. And a clue to where the thoughts come from, the word devil comes from the Greek word meaning liar, diabolos. Jesus said there is no truth in him. And Paul said, so we take all thoughts into captivity. We make them harmless. We take them away from where they might give us a problem. And Jesse Lee Peterson, faith is no more than doubting all the thoughts. So the spiritual approach is different. The thoughts are all lies. They're not our thoughts. And we need to separate ourselves from those thoughts. Even the good thoughts are lies. Thoughts that make us feel good about ourselves are lies. They're just building us up just to give us a bad thought later on to bring us down. Up and down, emotional. Feeling good about yourself is a setup. Don't seek compliments. You can't truly please people. People pleasers, nice people get cancer. The spiritual approach is different. The spiritual approach says that success, power, comfort, and recognition that the world offers are empty and don't really make for a change. They're temporary, just like the things we buy when we succumb to advertising. Jim Carrey said, "I wish everybody could have $20 million so they could see how empty it is." And under recognition at the bottom, even walking on the moon couldn't stop Buzz Aldrin from feeling low. In fact, the astronaut's sudden fame after the 1969 moon landing led to his divorce and problems with alcohol and depression. And that's true of a lot of very highly successful people. They reached the pinnacle and they were working for the pinnacle, thinking that would make them calm and give them peace. And when it didn't, their life fell apart. The world offers individualism, materialism, rationalism, scientism. If it can't be measured, it isn't there. Russell Brand. So the world, according to the spiritual approach, has little to offer. We have to look at management or overcoming stress from the inside, from the unseen. And to understand how to get out of stress, it's helpful to understand how we got there, the source of stress. The parable in the Bible to help us understand how it happened and how it happens today is the fall in the Garden of Eden, the fall away from God. Eve said to the serpent, God told us if we eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, playing God, that we will die. And the serpent said, you won't die. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. And they didn't die physically, but they sure died spiritually once they ate from the tree. Anyone who has been traumatized and then resents the person that traumatized them has been deceived by the lie and is pretending to be like God, knowing or judging good and evil. Resentment is judgment. Anyone who judges has anger. Anger is a spirit of judgment. In fact, from the Garden of Eden story, playing God for humans is actually distancing ourselves from God, and we take on the spirit of evil, which is a spirit of anger and judgment, and we play God. And the summary is that anger is the source of stress. Judgment, anger, playing God is what really is going on. It's a spiritual problem inside us, controlling us, influencing us. Some people may not be aware of this spirit of anger in them because it shows in ways that people don't think of as anger. Complaining is anger, gossiping is anger, blaming others for their failures is anger, belittling other people, getting impatient, getting frustrated, that's all anger. It's an angry spirit inside. Judging, that is anger. Judging other people sounds like, can you believe they did so-and-so? People love to look at the news and find out the latest murder or problem and say, can you believe that? How could anybody do that? And then a lot of people don't judge like that, and they feel pretty good about themselves, but they self-judge. And self-judgment is no different from judging other people. Self-judging people say to themselves, I can't believe I did that. I should have done so-and-so, or I'm such an idiot. The truth is that humans are not to judge. Judging is playing God. If anybody has anger or resentment, they are judging. It's the same spirit. God's spirit is a spirit of peace and non-judgment, grace and truth. Jesus said, do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. Angry people live to control others. There's a quote at the St. Petersburg Holocaust Museum from Hitler that he was trying to incite rage in the people he talked to. And it worked. He got them angry. And because he got them angry, he was able to control them. People with anger impose their will on others, imposing their expectations, especially on their children. That is playing God. That is how children are traumatized. Anyone who has not overcome the stress or overcome their anger and fear will traumatize their children. All anger is hate all the time. You cannot have hate inside and have love inside. The spiritual approach says that there are two different spirits that cannot reside together. Breathing exercises aren't the real answer to spiritual changes. And true peace is peace inside. No anger, no fear, regardless of your condition or your circumstance, regardless of who you're working or living with. And from the t-shirts and the ad for the Marines, we know the battle is within. It's good versus evil. The spiritual battle is between evil forces that want us to overreact with anger and fear, so they can control us to our destruction, versus the good spiritual force that wants us to have peace inside, no anger, no fear, to give us life. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi in Empire Strikes Back understood this when he told Luke, don't give in to the hate. That leads to the dark side. Anyone who has anger is in darkness and cannot see clearly. Jesus said, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. The log is the angry spirit. Fear is the other side of stress. You may not be aware of your fear, but insecurity is fear. Making excuses, doubting yourself, that's from fear. Fear of punishment. Fear is the daughter of anger. Anger separates us from God. That's the Garden of Eden story. And when we're separated from God, we have fear. So there's a difference between managing and overcoming stress. You can attempt to manage stress with medications, relaxation exercises, mind control, sugar, caffeine, a new car, exercise, or a stiff drink. But for most people, the stress will remain and rear its ugly head from time to time, and you won't be able to see clearly in order to deal well with life. Stress can be overcome, however, by spiritual change inside, overcoming the angry spirit that made a home inside you when you were traumatized, usually as a child, and then resented those who did it to you, usually your parents. Overcome, not through human effort, but by a spiritual change. The spirit of love is more powerful than the spirit of fear and anger. Love never brings fear, for fear is always related to punishment, but love's perfection drives the fear far from our hearts. From 1 John. Love is not an emotion. Love is the ability to speak the truth without hate or fear. Love has no expectations. Love always involves a choice. So how can we overcome stress? How can we overcome this spirit of anger so that we can see clearly in life and not be stressed out? Number one, get to know yourself. Quietly observe the thoughts in your head. You have to sit still. Just observe. Separate yourself from the thoughts. Remember, they are not your thoughts. Understand the spiritual battle inside. Quietly ask God when you're quiet and at peace, when you can listen to God. Ask Him to reveal your heart to you, to reveal any resentment in you, and to reveal the source of your resentment. Ask who it was that traumatized you, and then wait, and God will reveal to you what you ask for from your heart. Then overcome the angry spirit through forgiveness. Forgiveness is not asking another person for forgiveness. Forgiveness is first repentance, apologizing for resenting, for judging those who hurt you. Pardon me. As an adult, you become responsible for yourself, responsible to overcome the childhood anger and misbehavior. Apologize to the person who traumatized you face to face, if possible. Second, after apologizing for resenting, speak the truth to them without hating. Tell them what they did wrong and how it caused you to resent when you were a child. Third, forgive them. Forgive the people that hurt you. Release the anger. These people, usually your parents, who hurt you, couldn't help it. They were influenced by evil, just like you, and they were doing the best they could. So overcoming stress involves being still. Be still and know God, Psalm 46. It involves going to someone who you resent and reconciling by apologizing for your resentment. If you remember your brother has something against you, go, first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering? And Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, for if you forgive those who have messed up in your life, traumatized you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive those who have messed up in your life, traumatized you, neither will your heavenly Father forgive you. These are the two verses after the Lord's Prayer. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught the disciples to say, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Forgive us what we owe other people, the apology we owe other people for imposing our will on them, for getting angry at them, for running away from our responsibilities. Forgive us those things we do as we forgive other people who did that to us. So if we've been traumatized by someone, then the Lord's Prayer is, forgive us if we forgive the people that traumatized us. Then forgive us for taking on resentment. All bitterness, wrath, and anger must be removed from you, along with all malice. Apostle Paul, Ephesians 4:31. So let's summarize the spiritual approach. Stress is an emotional reaction to thoughts. The thoughts are not your thoughts, and all the thoughts are lies. The thoughts are from evil spirit, trying to influence you to destroy yourself. When you find yourself in situations, relax. Don't overreact to the thoughts. You cannot escape, nor can you control your life. The spirits are too strong for us. Even relax if you do happen to overreact. Become the observer in your life. Overcoming stress requires a spiritual change from hate to love, a change of heart, a return to your earthly father and your heavenly Father, a return to your Creator through repentance and forgiveness. Then God will forgive you and change your heart. Once the spirit of love drives out the anger and takes over, the fears will be driven out and your mind renewed. So let's wrap it up. Stress, a better understanding. It is my hope that you have a better understanding of what stress is. Remember, it's not your job. It's not your spouse. It's not world events. Stress is your emotional reaction to a threat. Stress is anger or fear. Stress interferes with rest. It ruins relationships. It causes a life of chaos and crisis. It leads to heart disease, cancer, and a myriad of other diseases. You can try and manage your stress through human effort, through support groups, anger management, meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, medications and substance use, counseling and therapy. You can spend a lot of money trying to manage stress. But there is a way to overcome stress. A spiritual change. And if you want a spiritual change, find a quiet place and sit still. Close your eyes and watch the thoughts in your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. Don't react or respond to the thoughts. Rather, become the observer. Discover the stress or anger inside by being still and asking God to reveal your heart to you. Overcome the angry spirit that made a home with you when you resented those that traumatized you. As a child, usually your parents, first by apologizing them for resenting. Then tell them what they did that traumatized you by either overreacting emotionally with you as a child or imposing their will on you, telling you better get good grades or you better go to college or work for the government or whatever, or by turning you against your father, as mothers can do when fathers leave the family and blame everything on the father. Then, after apologizing for resenting, being honest about how you were traumatized and how they did it to you, then forgive them. Let the anger go. Tell them you realize that they did the best they could. They were traumatized too. Their parents traumatized them just the way you were traumatized. They couldn't help it. After all, they couldn't help it. They were traumatized by their parents and overcome by the same spirit that overcame you. God said in one of his 10 commandments, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land God is giving you. Honor means don't hate. Overcome the resentment. Overcoming stress is available to everyone. A life of peace and order is available to anyone who seeks it, living from within, stress-free, no anger, no fear, speaking up without hate. As Yoda said to Luke, you must unlearn what you have learned. And finally, a greeting card that my wife bought that I took a picture of. If you hold on to the handle, she said, it's easier to maintain the illusion of control. Control of your life and the life of others is just an illusion. But it's more fun if you just let the wind carry you. Overcoming stress, getting that new spirit, and you will let the wind carry you from there. My personal contact info for you, and I hope you got something out of this. And please contact me if you'd like. And now that's the end of the broadcast. Sorry, I'm having trouble stopping this. My first time on StreamYard. Oh, here we go.